Good evening and welcome again to our notes on the American Revolution. We're picking up with the beginning of the war after some shots have been fired at Lexington and Concord. And our inquiry question for the day is, who had the advantage after the first year of the war? So let's review where we left off. In 1770, there was a conflict between the lobsterbacks or the redcoats and the American colonists, where 5 American colonists were killed in what became known as the Boston Massacre. 3 years later, in 1773, the British government again placed a tax on the colonists, this time on tea. The colonists responded this time by raiding the ships that were holding the tea and throwing the tea into the Boston Harbor. This was called the Boston Tea Party. In 1775, we get to the official start of the war, where in Lexington and Concord, the redcoats were marching to Concord to seize the ammunition of the colonists. The colonists decided to meet the redcoats in Lexington Square, and somebody fired a first shot. And from that point on, battle began and war began. If we jump ahead to 1776, January of 1776, Thomas Paine writes a pamphlet called Common Sense. Common Sense urged the American people that it was time to separate and abolish the ties between Britain and the colonies. Later that year, in July of 1776, America finally declares its independence from Britain. So that's where we're picking up. At this time, the colonies are divided. We have about 40% of the people living in the colonies are patriots, people wanting to fight and supporting the American cause. About 20% are loyalists or Tories, people supporting the British, and the other 40% are neutral. They're not taking either side. They're just going on with their lives as normal. So if we jump back into 1775, a month after Lexington and Concord, we have another battle, or another skirmish, at Fort Ticonderoga. This was a fort held by the British that had some ammunition and cannons, which, if you remember from yesterday's notes, we saw that the Americans, one of the weaknesses of the Americans at the beginning of the war is they didn't have much artillery or weapons or cannons. So a patriot named Ethan Allen led a group of people called the Green Mountain Boys. They marched up to Fort Ticonderoga in May of 1775 and captured the fort. This fort had lots of artillery. Artillery are big cannons, guns, not your typical just musket that the average soldier would have, but these are the big cannons that they could set up on the hills to use during the battles as well. What we learned through Fort Ticonderoga is that the Americans will not be easily defeated. They're going to stand up to this British army, this army that everyone says is the best in the world, and that nobody can stand foot to foot with them. As you see in this bottom picture here, there's snow on the ground at this time still, and they had to drag these cannons from Fort Ticonderoga all the way to Boston. They will then be used a month later in our next battle we're going to talk about. But before we get to that battle, in May of 1775 as well, the colonists meet for the Second Continental Congress. This time, all 13 colonies meet. If you remember back to the First Continental Congress, only 12 of the 13 met. At this Congress, they give out an olive branch petition, which was a letter of loyalty to the king. This was the last chance to make peace with England before all-out war. In the letter, they asked the king to repeal the Intolerable Acts that he had placed after put in place after the Boston Tea Party. During the same Congress, they put in charge George Washington as commander-in-chief of the army. That means he's in charge of all of the military, not just a small group. So he's the head of all military. Today, the commander-in-chief of the military is the President of the United States. As we continue, The next battle we'll see is Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill happened yet a month later. So in June 16th, 1775, we have this battle in Boston at Bunker and Breed's Hill. The British want the high ground over Boston. However, the militia fortified the hill, dug trenches, built walls. As you see, they have these dirt walls sitting at the top. Having the high ground makes it easier to protect. It's easier to shoot down a hill than it is to shoot up. And as we go, the Redcoats or the British tried 3 times getting up the hill. However, the Americans were very, very low on ammunition. They were told, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes. So they had to wait till the British soldiers got extremely close before they were shooting, because they wanted to make sure that every shot they took was a kill shot and not a wasted bullet, since they were so low on ammunition. In this battle, over 1,000 British soldiers were killed compared to just 400 colonists. However, on that 3rd try up the hill, the British are able to take the hill because the colonists run out of ammunition and have to flee. This is the first major battle of the American Revolution. The other ones were much smaller, not large numbers of people. As you see here, we have many, many more people dying in this battle than the previous ones that we've talked about. This proves that the Americans can stand up to the British, and they're not going to back down easily. So this is the Battle of Bunker Hill. It's the first major battle of the war. It gets the fighting started, and we see it's not going to just be a cakewalk for the British. So the British respond by setting up a blockade. They shut off the port in Boston Harbor. A blockade is where you use ships so no other ships can come in and out. This keeps supplies from moving both in and out of the area, so colonists weren't able to load things onto ships and get them out of there, Boston, or when they were low on supplies, get them back in. At the same time, the British go off and hire soldiers. These hired soldiers were called Hessians. They were German troops that were for hire. So the British would pay these German troops to come and fight. We will see these Hessians come into play as we go forward. When we start talking about the leadership of George Washington, we'll see the Hessians come into play even more. But they are fighting some of the battles as well as the Redcoats throughout this war. So this is the beginning of the war. This is all 1775. We're not yet to the Declaration of Independence. We had taken a step back. But if you look at this, we see Americans seize some ammunition and artillery at Ticonderoga. We see them stand up to the British at Bunker Hill. However, they lost the battle. Who had the advantage? The British win Bunker Hill. British have more supplies. But if you think back to yesterday's advantages and disadvantages or weaknesses, we see some major weaknesses of the colonies as well. So come prepared to look at these events a little bit more tomorrow. I hope you have a good evening. And come prepared tomorrow. Thank you.